Welcome to West Film, where every movie has a story worth telling. From heart-pounding action to twisty mysteries and dramas that stick with you, we dig into the plot, the characters, and the moments that make each film worth your time. So grab a seat, get comfortable, and let's jump into today's movie. This is West Film, your story starts here. Tootsie, the making of a comedy classic, an ensemble built to last. Tootsie marked another turning point for Jessica Lange. As Julie Nichols, she brought warmth, intelligence, and quiet authenticity to a role that, in lesser hands, could have been reduced to a stock romantic interest. Instead, Lange gave audiences a woman wrestling with professional setbacks and messy relationships, handling both with honesty and restraint. That performance won her the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress and cemented her standing as one of Hollywood's most gifted dramatic actresses. The film opened doors to a career that would go on to include Blue Sky, Sweet Dreams, Music Box, Cape Fear, Grey Gardens, and American Horror Story. Teri Garr played Sandy Lester, Michael's anxious actress friend whose failed audition sets the entire plot in motion. By the time she took the role, Garr had already made a name for herself as one of Hollywood's sharpest comic talents, with credits including Young Frankenstein, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and Oh, God, along with a long list of television work that showcased her charm, timing, and knack for making nervous, relatable characters feel real. Her work in Tootsie stands among her best. Sandy's insecurity, self-doubt, and hunger for recognition make her both funny and quietly heartbreaking, and Garr transforms what could have been a throwaway supporting part into one of the film's emotional cores. The performance brought her an Oscar nomination and further cemented her reputation as one of the era's most dependable comic actresses. Charles Durning took on the role of Lane Nichols, Julie's widowed father, whose blossoming crush on Dorothy fuels some of the film's most awkward and funniest moments. Durning had spent years earning a reputation as one of America's finest character actors. After serving with distinction in World War II, he came to acting relatively late in life but quickly became known for playing ordinary working-class men with warmth and believability, in films like Dog Day Afternoon, The Sting, True Confessions, and The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. In Tootsie, he balances comedy with real sincerity rather than playing lay for laughs alone, portraying a lonely man genuinely searching for connection. The performance earned him an Oscar nomination and remains one of the film's most memorable turns. Dabney Coleman played Ron Carlisle, Julie's self-absorbed and manipulative director. Coleman had built a career playing arrogant authority figures whose bravado masked deep insecurity, with credits like 9 to 5 and the TV series Buffalo Bill establishing him as one of the best in the business at playing charming but thoroughly unlikable men. His work as Ron captures the casual sexism Michael slowly learns to recognize while living as Dorothy, and crucially, Coleman never lets the character tip into cartoonish villainy. Instead, he builds a believable executive whose everyday attitudes point to something much larger, sharpening the film's satire in the process. Bill Murray, in one of his earliest dramatic outings, played Jeff Slater, Michael's playwright roommate, already a star from Saturday Night Live and comedies like Meatballs, Caddyshack, and Stripes. Murray surprises here with real restraint, his dry, understated observations providing both comic relief and quiet commentary throughout. George Gaines rounded out the cast as John Van Horn, the aging soap opera star whose relentless pursuit of Dorothy generates some of the film's most memorable comic set pieces. And Sidney Pollack, who directed the film, also stepped in front of the camera as Michael's exhausted agent. George Fields his dry humor and believable frustration making for a terrific comic pairing with Hoffman, especially in their frequent arguments over Michael's impossible behavior. Together, this ensemble gave Tootsie one of the strongest casts of the early 1980s. Every actor brought years of experience to the table while staying fully in service of the story rather than competing for the spotlight. Their work turned the film from a clever comedy into a lasting character study built on humor, compassion, and emotional honesty are one where every relationship feels real, every joke feels earned, and every emotional beat still lands decades later. A film perfectly timed. Tootsie arrived in theaters in 1982, at a moment when American culture was in the middle of major conversations about gender roles, workplace equality, and personal identity. Audiences first embraced it simply as a smart romantic comedy, but over time it earned a reputation as something considerably more significant, to a cultural touchstone that pushed viewers to think about women's everyday experiences through the unlikely lens of a man forced to live as one. By pairing sharp humor with real emotional insight, the film managed to entertain millions while gently challenging assumptions that most people had never stopped to question. Part of what made the film land so powerfully was its timing. Throughout the late 1970s and into the early 80s, more women than ever were entering professional careers, and conversations about equal opportunity, workplace discrimination, sexual harassment, and gender expectations were becoming harder to ignore in newspapers, on television, and in political debate. Even so, much of this remained abstract for large segments of the public. Tootsie came at these issues sideways, rather than building a conventional social drama full of speeches and courtroom scenes. It used comedy to surface the small, constant forms of inequality that women dealt with every day. As Michael Dorsey lives as Dorothy Michaels, he discovers just how differently people treat him once they perceive him as a woman, and audiences laughed at the situations while quietly recognizing some uncomfortable truths underneath them. The film is full of small, telling moments of everyday sexism. Dorothy gets talked over, judged on her looks, underestimated at work, and hit on without invitation. None of it plays as an isolated incident. It's simply presented as ordinary life. Because we experience all of this through Michael's eyes, we share his mounting frustration right alongside him, and that choice makes the film's message land through empathy rather than confrontation. Many male viewers said afterward that the film made them rethink behavior they'd once brushed off as harmless, while many women appreciated seeing a mainstream Hollywood comedy acknowledge experiences they already knew all too well. Identity, disguise, and Dorothy Michaels. Part of what makes Tootsie endure is its exploration of identity. The film isn't about gender identity in the way a modern story might frame it, but it does ask timeless questions about authenticity, empathy, and growth. Michael initially creates Dorothy purely to land acting work or just another role to play. But the longer Dorothy exists in the world, the more Michael himself begins to change. He grows more patient, more compassionate, and more conscious of how his own arrogance has hurt people over the years. What starts as a disguise gradually becomes an act of self-discovery. That shift is what gives the comedy its emotional weight and sets the film apart from many of its contemporaries. Dorothy Michaels herself became an instantly recognizable pop culture figure, and unlike many cross-dressing characters from earlier films, she's portrayed with real dignity instead of ridicule. Audiences laugh at the increasingly tangled situations Michael creates, not at Dorothy as a person, and Hoffman's performance makes sure viewers believe in her as a fully realized human being. That respectful approach influenced later filmmakers by proving that disguise-driven comedy didn't need to lean on cruel stereotypes to work. Dorothy became so iconic that images of Hoffman in character turned up on magazine covers, talk shows, and promotional campaigns around the world. Tootsie also helped reshape what a romantic comedy could look like. Earlier decades of the genre had leaned heavily on misunderstandings, slapstick, and convenient coincidence. Tootsie kept some of those familiar tools but grounded them in relationships that felt real. The romance between Michael and Julie works because it grows out of friendship, trust, and mutual respect rather than instant attraction or more mature approach that influenced later romantic comedies looking to balance humor with believable character work. Many filmmakers pointed to Tootsie as proof that audiences would embrace intelligent comedy built on emotional honesty rather than easy jokes. The soap opera backdrop added another layer. Much of the story plays out behind the scenes of a fictional daytime drama, giving audiences a fond, funny look at an industry that dominated weekday afternoon television at the time and drew a devoted, largely female audience. Tootsie gently pokes fun at the exaggerated acting, breathless plotting, and frantic production schedules of soap operas while still respecting the people who made them, turning the fictional show into a clever backdrop for exploring bigger ideas about performance and public identity. The film even sparked conversations about acting itself. Michael begins the story believing technical skill is all that separates a good actor from a great one. Playing Dorothy teaches him that understanding another person's experience matters just as much, a message that resonated deeply within the acting community and still gets cited in acting schools today when discussing character work, emotional truth, and the value of observing real human behavior instead of leaning purely on technique. Critics also praised the screenplay for tackling serious subjects without becoming preachy. Rather than sorting characters into heroes and villains, the film shows flawed people operating inside social systems they often fail to notice. Ron Carlyle embodies casual workplace sexism, yet he never sees himself as the bad guy. Michael himself starts the story exhibiting plenty of the same attitudes he later comes to reject. That complexity invites audiences to reflect on their own behavior rather than simply passing judgment on fictional characters, and it's a big part of why the film has aged so well. As the decades have passed, Tootsie has continued to shape conversations about gender and representation, with new generations reading certain scenes differently than audiences did back in 1982. Even so, most viewers still connect with its central message about empathy and respect. Film scholars regularly cite it as an example of mainstream entertainment that manages real social commentary without sacrificing commercial appeal, and it remains a fixture in university film courses covering comedy, gender, and American cinema in the late 20th century. The film's reach has extended well beyond film criticism. Dorothy Michaels shows up constantly in sitcoms, award shows, comedy sketches, and everyday conversation whenever the topic turns to disguises, mistaken identity, or actors transforming themselves for a role. Hoffman's look as Dorothy, complete with her signature hairstyle and confident smile, remains one of the most recognizable character transformations in film history, recognizable even to people who've never actually seen the movie. Its enormous commercial success also encouraged studios to invest in comedies that took on real social observation, and many later films exploring workplace dynamics, gender roles, or personal transformation borrowed ideas Tootsie had helped popularize. More than 40 years after its release, the film still sparks conversations about kindness, empathy, and understanding. Arguably its greatest achievement is getting millions of viewers to consider someone else's point of view without ever feeling lectured. Getting the film made behind every great film is a production story nearly as compelling as what ends up on screen, and Tootsie is no exception. Audiences remember it for its sharp writing and unforgettable performances, but the road from script to screen was anything but smooth. The project went through years of rewrites, creative clashes, and demanding rehearsals before becoming one of the defining films of the early 1980s, and much of its success traces back to the sheer dedication of everyone involved, especially Dustin Hoffman and director Sydney Pollack, whose partnership was often passionate, productive, and occasionally combustible. The idea for Tootsie took shape in the late 1970s, drawing on the long comic tradition of characters disguising themselves as someone else. Cross-dressing had shown up in countless stage plays and classic films before, but the filmmakers wanted something with more emotional grounding than a straightforward farce. Instead of leaning entirely on mistaken identity and outrageous mix-ups, they set out to tell a story about empathy, growth, and the everyday realities women face in professional settings, a goal that shaped every choice made during the writing process. The script went through extensive revisions before a single scene was filmed. Multiple writers contributed ideas, sharpening characters, strengthening relationships, and tightening dialogue. Rather than rush into production, the filmmakers took years to balance the comedy with genuine emotional depth, understanding that if audiences didn't believe in Michael Dorsey or Dorothy Michaels as real people, nothing else in the film would work. Every joke needed to grow naturally out of believable situations instead of relying on exaggerated slapstick or contrived misunderstandings. Hoffman was deeply involved from early on. Known throughout the industry for his intense preparation, he treated Tootsie with the same seriousness he brought to his dramatic roles. Refusing to treat Dorothy as a mere costume, he insisted on building a complete persona, her own posture, voice, and emotional presence, and worked with movement coaches before filming to study how women walked, stood, and interacted socially. Rather than lean on stereotype, he observed everyday behavior closely, hoping to give Dorothy real dignity and authenticity. One of the most famous stories from the shoot involves Hoffman's first full makeup test. After hours in the chair surrounded by wigs, cosmetics, and carefully chosen clothing, Hoffman finally looked in the mirror expecting to see an attractive woman staring back. Instead, he saw someone he considered fairly ordinary, and by his own account, the moment affected him deeply. He reportedly asked the makeup team whether they could make Dorothy more conventionally attractive, assuming audiences would respond better. When they told him they'd already done everything realistically possible, something clicked. He later said that if he'd been born looking like Dorothy, he might never have experienced the advantages that came with conventional Hollywood good looks, a realization that became one of the emotional foundations of his performance and deepened his understanding of the judgments women face over appearance alone. Building Dorothy's look required close collaboration between costume designers, hairstylists, and makeup artists. Every dress, hairstyle, pair of glasses, and accessory was chosen not just to disguise Michael, but to establish Dorothy as a believable middle-aged working actress. The wardrobe steered away from glamour in favor of practicality and confidence, because the whole story depended on audiences buying that the deception could actually succeed. Sidney Pollack wore two hats throughout production, directing the film while also playing Michael's world-weary agent, George Fields. He initially resisted appearing on camera at all, preferring to stay behind it, but after the production struggled to cast the role, Hoffman talked him into taking it himself. Pollack agreed reluctantly, and juggling both jobs proved exhausting. He'd often spend long days directing complicated scenes before immediately stepping in front of the camera to act. His natural chemistry with Hoffman became one of the film's real strengths, particularly in their spirited arguments, many of which felt genuinely spontaneous. The Hoffman-Pollack relationship became something of Hollywood legend. Both men had strong opinions and perfectionist streaks, and they argued constantly over scenes, dialogue, pacing, and motivation. The crew members joked that their debates lasted almost as long as the actual filming. But the friction rarely turned personal. Both were chasing the same goal of making the best film possible. Pollack later admitted that working with Hoffman could be difficult, but that his relentless push for excellence raised the level of everyone around him, and their creative tension ultimately shows up in the finished film's quality. Filming took place primarily in New York City, which gave the movie the genuine energy of the theater district rather than the polished sheen typical of Hollywood productions. Real streets, offices, restaurants, and apartments grounded the story in an authentic urban setting. The fictional soap opera studio was built to mirror the frantic pace of actual daytime television, complete with cramped dressing rooms, busy rehearsal spaces, and production offices that help the cast settle into the daily rhythms of working performers. How the story unfolds at its heart. Tootsie tells a story of personal transformation dressed up as a romantic comedy. It starts with a simple premise: an actor disguising himself as a woman to land worker, but gradually deepens into a rich exploration of identity, honesty, and self-discovery. Every complication grows naturally out of the one before it, and the pacing carefully balances comedy with emotional development, so that every laugh also pushes the story forward. The film opens by introducing Michael Dorsey, a hugely talented but famously difficult actor in New York. From the start, we see both his gifts and his fatal flaw. His perfectionism and refusal to compromise have made him virtually unhearable. Directors won't work with him because he argues over every script and every decision, and his reputation has gotten so bad that casting agents turn him away before he even walks in the door. Michael believes the problem lies with everyone else, never quite recognizing that his own behavior is what's been holding him back. He shares an apartment with his friend Jeff Slater, a playwright struggling to finish his latest play, and their scenes together reveal both Michael's frustration and his loyalty to the people he cares about. Jeff is one of the few people who can tolerate Michael's stubbornness, offering advice through quiet humor rather than confrontation. Michael also supports his friend Sandy Lester, another actor facing constant rejection. When Sandy's audition for a role on a daytime soap falls through, and Michael learns the producers are looking specifically for an older female actress, he starts considering an outrageous solution of his own. The story's first big turning point comes when Michael transforms into Dorothy Michaels and auditions for the part himself. Rather than simply reading the lines as written, Dorothy pushes back against the script's flat, submissive version of the character. The producers are caught off guard by her confidence but ultimately recognize something special, and Dorothy lands the role, becoming an overnight sensation. It's a wonderfully ironic setup. Michael finally earns real professional respect only by pretending to be someone else. As Dorothy's popularity grows, Michael quickly realizes that keeping two identities straight is far more complicated than he expected. Each new development raises the stakes. At first the deception seems manageably. Michael simply shows up to work as Dorothy and comes home as himself, but every relationship Dorothy forms creates fresh complications he can't fully control, and the audience watches these problems pile up with a mix of suspense and comedy. Things escalate further when Michael meets Julie Nichols, his co-star on the soap. Julie quickly grows close to Dorothy, trusting her the way she'd confide in another woman, and Michael falls for Julie without any way to reveal who he really is without destroying the friendship he's built. That tension becomes one of the story's strongest engines. Every conversation between Dorothy and Julie deepens their bond while making Michael's secret more painful to carry. Several subplots weave through the main story at the same time. Julie's father, Leigh, develops real feelings for Dorothy, convinced he's finally found someone who understands him. John Van Horn, the aging soap star, won't stop pursuing Dorothy no matter how often she discourages him. Sandy, sensing Michael pulling away emotionally, starts hoping their relationship might turn serious. Even Julie's controlling director, Ron, starts making unwanted advances towards Dorothy. Each subplot ratchets up the pressure on Michael while creating a chain of misunderstandings that stay believable because they all grow out of earlier events. Part of what makes the screenplay work so well is its balance of external and internal conflict. On the outside, Michael has to maintain the deception without getting caught, which means constant planning and quick thinking. On the inside, though, he's changing in much deeper ways. Living as Dorothy forces him to see the world from a completely different angle, and he starts recognizing the disrespect, objectification, and limited opportunities women deal with regularly, experiences that gradually make him more compassionate and self-aware. The pacing reflects this dual journey. alternating high-energy comic sequences with quieter emotional scenes that let the story breathe and deepen the audience's investment in the characters rather than just the jokes. What the film is really about, one of the biggest reasons Tootsie has stayed relevant for more than 4 decades, is the depth of its themes. On the surface, it's a romantic comedy full of mistaken identity and funny misunderstandings, but underneath that lies a genuinely thoughtful look at human behavior, social expectations, and personal change. Rather than relying solely on its central gimmick, the film uses that setup as a way into questions about identity, empathy, honesty, gender, ambition, and authentic connection, ideas that every major character contributes to in some way. Identity sits at the center of it all. Michael begins the story convinced he already knows exactly who he is, a supremely talented actor whose lack of success is entirely someone else's fault. It's only by pretending to be someone else that he starts discovering who he actually is. Dorothy begins as a calculated performance meant to land a job, but she slowly becomes a mirror reflecting qualities Michael never realized he had. Through her, he learns patience, humility, and real respect for other people. In the end, the disguise reveals more about his true character than it ever conceals. Empathy is closely tied to that arc. Michael's biggest transformation happens because he's literally living another person's experience. Before becoming Dorothy, he brushes off the frustrations the women around him describe, assuming success comes down to talent and effort alone. Living as Dorothy forces him to confront the countless small obstacles women face daily: a condescension, unwanted attention, and constant judgment based on appearance, and he feels the emotional weight of it firsthand rather than just observing it from a distance. The film's argument is that real empathy tends to show up only when people step outside their own experience and try to understand someone else's. Respect runs through the story as well. Michael starts out treating people as obstacles rather than individuals, so interrupting, arguing, dismissing opinions, assuming he's automatically right. Dorothy behaves completely differently. She listens, encourages, supports her colleagues, and speaks honestly without cruelty. Watching Dorothy earn people's admiration teaches Michael that respect builds stronger relationships than intimidation ever could. A lesson that extends well beyond gender. The gap between appearance and reality shows up in nearly every relationship in the film. Julie thinks Dorothy is simply a trusted friend. Leigh sees her as a potential partner. Ron reads her professionalism as romantic interest. Sandy assumes Michael's distance means his feelings for her are fading. Even Michael misunderstands himself at the start. These layers of misreading generate much of the comedy, but they also show how often people draw conclusions from surface impressions rather than real understanding, and the eventual reveal forces everyone to reconsider what they thought they knew. The film also examines gender expectations, not by presenting men and women as fundamentally different but by showing how society pushes them into different roles. Michael discovers that identical behavior gets read very differently depending on whether it comes from a man or a woman. A confidence in a man can look like aggression in a woman, and Dorothy's experiences make that double standard impossible to ignore. Importantly, the film doesn't offer easy answers. It simply invites viewers to notice how much these expectations shape everyday interactions. Finally, there's the tension between honesty and deception. Michael's lie opens doors that would otherwise stay closed, but every advantage comes with a rising emotional cost. What starts out feeling harmless becomes genuinely painful once real friendships and feelings enter the picture, and Michael finds himself unable to express anything honest without risking exposure. That emotional bind makes the film's point clearly. Dishonesty, even for understandable reasons, eventually damages the relationships that matter most, and while honesty can be painful in the moment, it's the only real foundation for trust. Visual style. Restraint over spectacle. One of Tootsie's defining strengths is that it never tries to dazzle audiences with flashy camera work or visual effects. Instead, The film leans into a naturalistic style that keeps the performances and relationships front and center. Director Sidney Pollack and cinematographer Owen Roizman understood that everything depended on audiences fully believing Michael's transformation into Dorothy, so every choice, camera placement, lighting, costume was made in service of realism rather than spectacle. The result is a visual language that has aged remarkably well. Proof that great cinematography often comes from holding back rather than showing off. Roizman was already one of Hollywood's most respected cinematographers by the time he signed on, with a copyright, copyrights that included The French Connection, The Exorcist, Network, and Kramer vs. Kramer. Rather than importing a flashy style into Tootsie, he adapted his approach to match the story's grounded tone, photographing New York with warmth that makes the city's energy feel authentic and lived in, which in turn helps audiences accept even the film's more far-fetched moments, because the world around them always feels real. The camera often behaves like a quiet observer rather than a device constantly reminding viewers they're watching a movie, letting conversations and performances unfold naturally. Lighting reinforces that same sense of authenticity, soft, balanced, and mostly drawn from practical sources like lamps, office lights, and daylight through windows, avoiding the dramatic shadows associated with thrillers in favor of an atmosphere that mirrors ordinary life. The soap opera scenes offer a deliberate contrast, using the brighter, flatter lighting associated with actual daytime television as a subtle visual cue that helps audiences track when they're watching the show within the film without needing an obvious style shift, while also reinforcing how often Michael is performing different versions of himself depending on where he is. Roizman frequently favors medium shots that let viewers take in facial expression and body language together, an important choice, since Hoffman's transformation into Dorothy depends as much on posture and movement as on makeup. Close-ups are used sparingly and reserved for emotionally charged moments, Michael's growing feelings for Julie, Dorothy's frustration with workplace sexism, Sandy's insecurity, and the final reveal, so that each one carries real weight when it finally arrives. The framing itself tracks Michael's emotional arc. Early on he often appears isolated within the frame, separated from others by furniture or physical distance even in a crowded room, but as Dorothy builds real relationships, the compositions grow warmer and more intimate, with characters sharing space more comfortably as the story goes on. Camera movement stays restrained throughout, generally following characters through offices, dressing rooms, and city streets rather than calling attention to itself. Another way the film keeps the focus on performance over technique. New York itself functions almost like another character, less a backdrop of glamorous landmarks than a portrait of the everyday spaces where working actors actually live. Music that knows when to stay quiet. Tootsie is remembered mostly for its writing and performances, but its music and sound design do real work shaping the film's emotional tone. Unlike comedies that lean on musical cues or exaggerated sound effects to punch up the jokes, Tootsie takes a much more restrained approach. The filmmakers trusted that the comedy came from the characters and situations themselves, so the score supports the story quietly instead of dominating it, while the sound design stays grounded in realism throughout. The score was composed by Dave Grusin, one of the most respected film composers working at the time, known for blending orchestral writing with jazz influences and a gift for emotional understatement rather than big, attention-grabbing themes. That made him an ideal fit for a film where the music needed to track the characters' emotional journeys without pulling focus from the dialogue and performances. Grusin's compositions favor gentle piano, soft strings, and light woodwinds, textures that create warmth without ever telling the audience exactly what to feel, working almost beneath conscious notice to support what's happening on screen. The score moves easily between comedy, romance, drama, and satire as the story shifts tone. During the funnier scenes, Grusin avoids obvious comedic cues, letting the actor's timing generate laughs on its own, a choice that reflects real confidence in the writing and performances. The romantic material benefits especially from his lyrical touch. As Michael falls for Julie, the music warms up without tipping into sentimentality, and because Julie believes she's building a friendship with Dorothy rather than a romance with Michael, the score carefully avoids overplaying its hand too early, letting the emotional intimacy develop naturally. The film's most famous musical contribution is probably It Might Be You, performed by Stephen Bishop and written specifically for the movie. The song became a hit in its own right and remains closely tied to the film decades later. Its gentle melody speaks to the emotional uncertainty at the heart of the story, touching on discovering unexpected love rather than physical attraction, echoing Michael's own journey toward understanding both Julie and himself. Its placement in the film reflects careful musical storytelling rather than a simple radio-friendly addition, and it became a hit on its own, introducing plenty of listeners to the film before they ever saw it. The soundtrack also knows the value of silence. Where many modern films fill nearly every scene with music, Tootsie frequently lets moments play out without any score at all, especially during emotionally important conversations, or letting audiences focus on faces and dialogue rather than musical cues. The sound design follows the same philosophy, filling New York's streets with distant traffic, footsteps, and city noise, and letting apartments and offices carry the ordinary sounds of doors, phones, and papers are small details that make the world feel genuine. The soap opera studio's sequences are especially vivid, full of production chatter, moving cameras, and lighting adjustments that immerse viewers in the fast pace of daytime TV production. Critical and commercial reception. When Tootsie opened in December 1982, few people expected it to become one of the year's biggest critical and commercial hits. On paper, the premise sounded risky. A comedy about an out-of-work actor disguising himself as a woman could easily have turned into a shallow farce full of cheap stereotypes. Instead, audiences found a film that combined sophisticated humor with real emotion, sharp social commentary, and outstanding performances. Critics praised its balance of comedy and drama, moviegoers embraced its themes of empathy and honesty, and the film quickly established itself as one of the defining achievements of the early 1980s and one of the most respected romantic comedies ever made. Critics responded almost immediately with enthusiasm, praising the screenplay for blending multiple genres: a romantic comedy, industry satire, character study, and exploration of gender roles without sacrificing emotional honesty in the process. Reviewers noted that the humor never relies on repeating the same disguise-related joke. Instead, every comic situation grows out of believable relationships. So audiences laugh because of human behavior rather than simply because a man is dressed as a woman. Hoffman's performance became one of the most celebrated aspects of the film. He'd already earned enormous respect for dramatic work in The Graduate, Midnight Cowboy, and Kramer vs. Kramer, and many critics saw Tootsie as further proof of his range. Reviewers noted that he never plays Dorothy as a stereotype or a punchline. She comes across as a complete person with her own confidence and emotional depth, and Hoffman manages to create two distinct personalities within one performance: Michael impatient and self-centered, Dorothy patient and warm. Jessica Lange also received wide acclaim for Julie, praised for bringing sincerity to a character who easily could have been overshadowed by Hoffman's larger role. She comes across as an independent woman with her own struggles rather than simply Michael's romantic objective, and her performance provides much of the emotional grounding for the film's increasingly tangled plot. The supporting cast earned plenty of recognition too. Garr's take on Sandy combined vulnerability with sharp comic timing, and many reviewers pointed to her as one of the film's most relatable characters given how well she captures the anxieties of struggling actors everywhere. Durning's warm performances drew similar praise for avoiding an easy joke and instead making him a genuinely sympathetic widower. Coleman was singled out for making workplace arrogance feel believable, While Murray impressed critics by showing real dramatic restraint alongside his familiar comic instincts, Pollack's direction received equally strong notices. Critics recognized just how hard it is to hold together the film's delicate balance of comedy and emotional truth, and praised him for resisting the temptation to exaggerate for easy laughs, instead letting scenes unfold through strong performances and smart dialogue. Many felt that a less disciplined director could easily have pushed the material into broad slapstick, but Pollack's restraint elevated it into something more sophisticated. The film's handling of gender issues drew particular praise. At a time when Hollywood often reached for broad stereotypes on similar subjects, Tootsie offered a genuinely thoughtful look at the everyday challenges women faced professionally, encouraging empathy without ever feeling preachy, letting audiences experience Michael's growing awareness alongside him rather than lecturing them directly. Commercially, the film became a massive success, earning hundreds of millions of dollars worldwide on a relatively modest budget and becoming one of the highest-grossing films of 1982. A result that surprised industry analysts who'd questioned whether audiences would embrace such an unconventional premise. Word of mouth carried the film across generations. Younger viewers responded to the fast-paced comedy and romantic entanglements, while older audiences recognized the emotional maturity underneath, and repeat viewings became common as people kept discovering new details in the dialogue and performances. A legacy beyond 1982. The legacy of Tootsie stretches well past its original release. While plenty of successful films fade after an initial wave of popularity, Tootsie took a different path, evolving from a well-reviewed comedy into one of the most influential character-driven films ever made. Decades later, it's still studied by filmmakers, actors, screenwriters, and film historians as a model for storytelling that balances humor, romance, drama, and social commentary, an influence visible both in films with similar narrative ideas and in the broader evolution of romantic comedy and character-focused filmmaking. One of the film's most important contributions was proving that mainstream audiences would embrace sophisticated comedy built on emotional truth rather than easy jokes. Before Tootsie, many Hollywood comedies leaned heavily on slapstick or exaggerated misunderstandings. While Tootsie certainly has its share of laughs, the comedy always grows out of believable characters and real emotional conflict, to an approach that encouraged filmmakers to trust audiences with stories combining entertainment and genuine character development, helping redefine what a successful romantic comedy could look like. That influence became especially visible during the late 1980s and through the 1990s, as Hollywood saw a wave of smarter romantic comedies that leaned less on exaggerated situations and more on believable relationships between complex people, many of them reflecting the storytelling philosophy Tootsie had helped popularize, where comedy and real emotional depth could coexist. The film also left a mark on stories built around disguise and mistaken identity. Cross-dressing had existed on stage and screen for centuries, from Shakespeare through silent film and classic Hollywood, but Tootsie transformed the device into something more meaningful, using it to explore empathy and identity rather than treating it purely as a visual gag. Later films exploring double lives or false identities often echoed the emotional structure established by Michael's journey, even when the tone differs considerably. The most obvious comparison is Mrs. Doubtfire, 1993, which tells the story of a man disguising himself as a woman for deeply personal reasons, though with a more family-oriented, sentimental tone. Both films explore how assuming another identity can make someone a better person while teaching them something new about relationships and responsibility. But Tootsie stays focused on workplace dynamics and personal maturity, while Mrs. Doubtfire centers on parenthood and family. Beyond narrative influence, Tootsie has shaped the careers of many filmmakers and performers who admired its craftsmanship. Directors regularly cite it as an example of near-perfect tonal balance, holding comedy, romance, satire, and drama together in a single screenplay is genuinely difficult, and Tootsie pulls it off with real confidence. Film schools still analyze its structure to show how separate storylines can converge into a satisfying emotional conclusion, and actors continue to study Hoffman's performance as one of the finest examples of character transformation achieved without exaggerated theatricality, illustrating that great acting depends on emotional consistency as much as external appearance. The screenplay itself, despite passing through many writers, feels remarkably unified, and continues to be praised for its efficient structure and believable dialogue. Its influence has even reached television, where sitcoms and dramas have referenced the film directly through costumes, dialogue, or plot lines built around mistaken identity. Dorothy Michaels became such a recognizable cultural figure that writers could reference her without any explanation at all. How audiences have connected with it. One of the more fascinating things about Tootsie is how differently it has landed with audiences across generations. While critics tended to focus on technical achievement and performance, ordinary viewers connected with it on a much more personal level, seeing pieces of themselves in the characters' insecurities and relationships. Because the film deals with universal human experiences rather than passing cultural trends, it has stayed relevant for more than 40 years, with each generation finding something slightly different in it. When audiences first saw Tootsie in 1982, many expected a light comedy built around a man in a dress. What they got instead surprised them with its emotional honesty. People laughed throughout, but they also left the theater thinking about the deeper ideas underneath the jokes, discussing the film's themes for days afterward. For many male viewers, Michael's journey became an unexpected invitation to self-reflection, as they experienced his growing awareness of how differently women are treated in everyday situations right alongside him. The film never lectured its audience, it simply let viewers watch Michael learn lessons many women already understood firsthand, and that gentle approach made it easier for people to engage with difficult topics without becoming defensive. Female audiences connected from a different angle, recognizing familiar situations throughout Dorothy's experience: a workplace disrespect, unwanted attention, and constant judgment based on appearance. Seeing these realities reflected in a mainstream Hollywood comedy, presented as ordinary rather than exaggerated for effect, created a real sense of recognition for many viewers. Audiences also responded strongly to the film's portrayal of imperfect people. None of the major characters are flawless heroes or obvious villains. Michael is talented but arrogant, Julie is intelligent but emotionally vulnerable, Sandy struggles with insecurity, Lange misreads his own situation while looking for companionship, and even Ron, despite embodying workplace sexism, behaves in ways many viewers recognize from real life rather than from an exaggerated fictional villain. That complexity let viewers identify with multiple characters rather than settling on a single favorite. Michael's personal transformation resonated especially strongly. He begins the story believing the world owes him success because of his talent, and gradually comes to understand that ability alone doesn't guarantee meaningful relationships or real happiness, a growth that feels earned because it comes from a lived experience rather than a sudden change of heart. The romance between Michael and Julie also struck a chord. Unlike romantic comedies built on instant attraction, their connection grows through friendship and trust, with Julie falling for the kindness and patience she experiences through Dorothy rather than any surface-level appeal, leading many viewers to read the relationship as evidence that real love depends on character rather than first impressions. For actors and other creative professionals, the film carried extra resonance. Its portrayal of auditions, professional rejection, and uncertain careers feeling remarkably authentic. And many performers have spoken about recognizing pieces of their own experience in Michael's story even if they never went to his lengths to find work. As younger viewers discovered the film through television, home video, and streaming, their reactions sometimes differed from those of 1982 audiences, reflecting how much society itself has changed. Some scenes that once read as progressive now get viewed through a more contemporary lens, sparking thoughtful discussion about how attitudes have shifted. Yet despite those changing perspectives, most younger viewers still connect with the film's core message about empathy and growth. The people at the center of the story. Character development is the emotional backbone of Tootsie. While the film is remembered for its clever premise and sharp comedy, its lasting appeal comes down to how believably its characters grow. Every major figure faces real emotional challenges or realizations that shape the story, and their individual arcs intertwine so that personal transformation matters just as much as the romantic plot. Michael Dorsey's journey from arrogance to empathy sits at the center of it all. We first meet him as an exceptionally talented but deeply frustrating figure, passionate about his craft, but so committed to artistic perfection that he's become nearly unemployable, constantly arguing with directors and refusing to compromise. His confidence borders on arrogance, and at this stage he sees himself as a victim of an unfair industry rather than recognizing his own role in his problems. His decision to become Dorothy has nothing to do with self-improvement at first. It's a desperate solution to unemployment. But the practical choice starts changing him from the inside out. As Dorothy, he can't rely on confrontation or stubbornness, so he learns to listen, cooperate, and show patience instead of aggression. These changes happen gradually, through everyday experience, which is exactly what makes them feel believable. His growing empathy becomes one of the most significant threads in his arc. He starts feeling firsthand the interruptions, unwanted attention, and constant underestimation that the women in his life have always described, and that shift fundamentally changes how he sees the world. His understanding of honesty deepens too. He initially believes he can keep Michael and Dorothy emotionally separate, but as his relationships deepen, he realizes real intimacy can't survive alongside deception. His eventual public confession isn't just about revealing the disguise, it's a decision to stop hiding behind performance and start living honestly, whatever the consequences. Julie Nichols experiences a quieter but equally meaningful arc. She starts out as a kind, intelligent actress juggling career ambitions with a complicated personal life, tangled up with Ron in a relationship that leaves her unsatisfied because he consistently puts his own interests first. Her friendship with Dorothy becomes one of the most important relationships in the film, offering her a space to speak openly without fear of judgment. Julie's greatest strength is her emotional openness as she listens, values honesty, and treats people with real compassion, although she struggles with confidence in romance, tolerating Ron's behavior longer than she should in the hope things will improve. Dorothy's encouragement helps Julie recognize her own worth, even though the irony is that Michael himself is learning the same lessons he's giving her. When Julie eventually discovers the truth, her sense of betrayal is real, but her response also shows real maturity. Rather than staying angry, she comes to see that even though Dorothy wasn't real, the kindness and understanding she experienced through her absolutely rare an insight that opens the door to forgiveness. Sandy Lester offers another compelling character study. She starts the film weighed down by professional rejection and personal insecurity, with every failed audition reinforcing her doubts about her own talent and worth. She constantly looks to Michael for reassurance, but he's often too caught up in his own problems to notice her feelings. Her vulnerability fuels much of the film's comedy, but it also makes her one of its most sympathetic characters. And over the course of the story, she gradually recognizes that her relationship with Michael lacks the honesty and mutual respect she deserves. Costume and design. Building a believable world. Costume and set design are among the most overlooked contributors to Tootsie's success. Audiences noticed Hoffman's remarkable transformation into Dorothy immediately, but that transformation depends on far more than makeup. Every costume, apartment, television studio, and restaurant was designed to build a world convincing enough that Michael's elaborate deception could exist without drawing attention to itself. The costume design faced a real challenge from day one. Dorothy couldn't simply look like a man in women's clothes, so she needed to read as a genuinely believable middle-aged actress working in early 1980s New York. since the whole story would fall apart if audiences questioned her too closely. The costume department approached her not as a disguise but as a real person with her own tastes and habits, and every piece in her wardrobe reflects that thinking. Dorothy's clothing favors practicality over glamour, tasteful dresses, professional jackets, comfortable shoes, and modest accessories that communicate confidence and maturity rather than an attempt to attract attention. A wardrobe that supports one of the film's central ideas about how women are perceived professionally. Color plays its part too, with soft blues, warm reds, and muted, earthy tones dominating Dorothy's outfits, projecting warmth without ever feeling flashy or unrealistic for her position. Her accessories, glasses, handbags, jewelry, are equally understated and functional, contributing to the sense that Dorothy has lived an entire life before the audience ever met her. Her hairstyle became one of the film's most recognizable visual details, designed to suit a successful middle-aged actress rather than lean on an overly glamorous wig. Its consistency throughout the film reinforces the stability of Dorothy's identity even as Michael's own life grows more chaotic. The makeup work functions as character creation rather than mere cosmetic enhancement. Rather than masking Hoffman's features under heavy product, the team focused on subtle shading and natural tones, aiming for credibility rather than perfection. Dorothy needed to look like an ordinary woman, not a glamorous Hollywood invention, and that realism is a big part of why audiences accepted her as a genuine person. Michael's own wardrobe offers a nice contrast, favoring casual jackets and comfortable clothing that suggests someone who prioritizes his craft over his appearance. Less structured and more spontaneous than Dorothy's carefully coordinated looks, echoing the difference between his messy personal life and her composed public image. Julie's costumes communicate warmth and quiet confidence through soft fabrics and natural colors, reinforcing her role as one of the film's most grounded characters, while Sandy's slightly less polished outfits and anxious body language subtly reflect her insecurity without a word of dialogue needed to explain it. A screenplay built to last. The screenplay for Tootsie is widely regarded as one of the finest examples of comedic writing in American film. Many romantic comedies rely mainly on funny situations or strong performances, but Tootsie succeeds because every line and every scene is doing double or triple duty: entertaining, developing character, advancing the plot, and deepening the film's themes all at once, without ever feeling forced. That balance is the product of years of collaboration and rewriting among several talented writers, all working to give every major character a clear emotional purpose. Rather than building the film around one clever idea, the writers made sure every subplot fed the central narrative, resulting in a tightly constructed script where nearly every conversation reveals character or sets up future complications. Very few scenes exist purely for comedy. The humor grows naturally out of situations that also deepen the emotional story, and the plot moves forward through the character's own choices rather than coincidence or contrivance. Dialogue carries a lot of the film's character work. Michael speaks with confidence bordering on certainty, filled with opinions and arguments because he genuinely believes he's usually right. As he becomes Dorothy, his speech shifts noticeably, more patient, more considered, more focused on drawing other people out, and the writers never announce the change directly. Audiences simply notice it happening through how he talks to people. Julie speaks with warmth and sincerity, sharing her frustrations openly without ever sounding like she's performing vulnerability, which makes her instantly relatable. Sandy's dialogue reflects her nervous energy and constant need for reassurance, generating comedy without ever tipping into caricature because her insecurity always feels emotionally true. Bill Murray's Jeff says relatively little, but nearly every line lands, his dry observations offering quiet commentary on the chaos unfolding around him are a deliberate choice that gives each line more weight. Ron's dialogue carries authority and casual arrogance, laced with subtle manipulation, and crucially the film never turns him into an obvious villain delivering cruel speeches. His attitudes emerge through ordinary workplace conversation, which makes him feel realistic and, as a result, more uncomfortable. The screenplay's humor grows out of misunderstanding and mismatched information rather than visual gags or slapstick. Nearly every joke exists because different characters know different things. Michael knows he's Dorothy. Julie believes Dorothy is a trusted friend. Leigh believes he's falling for Dorothy. Sandy believes Michael might finally be ready for something serious. Ron believes Dorothy secretly wants him. That web of mismatched assumptions is where most of the comedy lives. Selling a film that didn't fit one box. Marketing Tootsie was no small challenge for Columbia Pictures. Since the film didn't fit neatly into a single genre, it was simultaneously a romantic comedy, an industry satire, a character study, and a look at gender roles. Selling all of that in one campaign took real care. The studio needed to draw in audiences looking for a straightforward comedy while also convincing them the film offered something with more substance than a simple story about a man in a dress. The strength of that campaign played a real role in the film's transformation from an unconventional project into one of 1982's biggest hits. From the outset, the marketing centered on Dustin Hoffman, already one of the most respected actors in the world thanks to The Graduate, Midnight Cowboy, All the President's Men, Kramer vs. Kramer, and Marathon Man. His reputation drew in both critics and audiences who expected serious, character-driven work. Rather than downplaying his involvement, the campaign celebrated his transformation, encouraging audiences to watch one of Hollywood's great actors bring two unforgettable characters to life in a single film. The theatrical poster became one of the campaign's most memorable elements. A clean, confident image of Dorothy Michaels in a red dress and heels, briefcase in hand, instantly communicating that she was a serious professional rather than a costume gag. The image was simple and instantly recognizable, and its real power was in the curiosity it created. Why was Dustin Hoffman dressed as a sophisticated woman, and what had led to it? The title appeared in bold, easy-to-read lettering, and the designers wisely let Hoffman's image do most of the selling rather than cramming the poster with plot details, trusting audiences to get curious rather than trying to explain everything up front. The taglines followed the same instinct, hinting at humor and intrigue without giving away major story beats, preserving the surprises that make the film so enjoyable. The theatrical trailer followed the same restrained approach, introducing Michael's struggles as an unemployed actor before revealing his transformation into Dorothy. Rather than stringing together a highlight reel of jokes, it established the premise while showcasing the performances, giving audiences enough comedy to know it was funny while also hinting at the romance, emotional conflict, and workplace drama underneath, setting Tootsie apart from broader slapstick comedies of the period. The editing showed real restraint, too, highlighting Dorothy's increasingly tangled relationships, Julie's growing friendship, Leigh's budding crush, Michael's struggle to keep his secret without giving away how any of it resolves, building anticipation while protecting the audience's experience once they got to the theater. Television advertising rounded out the campaign, running spots during popular programs to reach the broad mix of families and regular moviegoers. The film was built to attract